Sometimes the people who leave us behind are not the ones who change our lives. Sometimes it is the soul who stays. On a bitter December night in western Montana, the wind moved through the pine trees like a whispered warning. Snow drifted across Highway 83 in slow white waves, covering the asphalt and softening the edges of the world. The mountains stood silent beneath a sky heavy with clouds, and the temperature had already fallen to 12 degrees. Most travelers had long since found shelter. Most homes had warm lights glowing behind their windows. But not everyone was safe that night. Near a narrow stretch of road bordered by dense forest, an aging pickup truck rolled to a stop beside a frozen turnout. Its headlights cut through the darkness for a moment before the engine fell silent. Inside sat a man whose face remained hidden beneath the shadow of a worn cap. He stared ahead without speaking. In the back seat, two small children slept beneath a faded blanket. They were twins, a boy and a girl, both 7 years old. Liam and Lily. Their cheeks were pink from the cold air that slipped through the cracks of the old truck. They had no idea their lives were about to change forever. The man glanced into the rearview mirror. For a brief second, something flickered across his expression. Regret. Fear. Maybe both. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. His hands trembled as he placed it beside the children. The wind pushed against the truck. Snow tapped softly against the windows. The silence felt endless. Finally, the man opened the door and stepped outside. His boots crunched across the snow-covered ground. He never looked back. Seconds later, the truck's taillights disappeared into the darkness, leaving the twins alone beneath the vast Montana sky. Hours passed. The storm grew stronger. Snow gathered against the tires. The forest seemed to close around the abandoned vehicle. Liam woke first. His eyes blinked open slowly as confusion settled across his face. "Lily," he whispered. His sister stirred beside him. The truck was cold now. Too cold. The heater had stopped long ago. Outside, nothing moved except the falling snow. Liam looked toward the front seat. No one was there. He called out again. No answer. Lily sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Fear began creeping into her voice. Where did he go? Neither child knew. Neither child understood. The only thing they knew was that they were alone. Then, from somewhere beyond the storm, a shape emerged between the trees. Large, silent, moving carefully through the snow. Two amber eyes reflected the moonlight hidden behind the clouds. A German shepherd stepped onto the road. His sable coat was dusted with snowflakes. His breath formed small clouds in the freezing air. He paused beside the truck and stared through the frosted glass. Liam froze. Lily held her breath. The dog didn't bark. He didn't scratch at the door. He simply watched them. His eyes seemed older than the winter around him. Wiser somehow, as though he already knew something the children did not. Then his gaze shifted toward the envelope resting beside them. For a long moment, he stood perfectly still. The wind howled through the trees. Snow swirled around his paws. And far away, hidden somewhere within the darkness of those mountains, a secret buried for years was beginning to wake. The German shepherd remained beside the truck as the storm deepened around them. Snow gathered across his back and along the edges of his ears, yet he did not move away. Inside, Liam pulled the blanket closer around himself and Lily. The cold had settled into the cab like an unwelcome guest. Every breath fogged the glass. Every minute felt longer than the one before. The dog stared toward the envelope again. Then, without warning, he stepped closer and nudged the side of the truck with his nose. Lily watched him carefully. "I think he wants us to look at something," she whispered. Liam hesitated before reaching for the folded envelope lying beside him. The paper felt old and slightly damp. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single photograph and a short handwritten note. The photograph showed two smiling infants wrapped in matching blue blankets. Liam immediately recognized the babies. It was him and Lily, but someone had carefully torn away part of the picture. Another person had once stood beside them, yet only a shoulder remained visible near the edge. The note was even stranger. It contained only one sentence. Liam read it twice before speaking the words aloud. "When the time comes, the truth will find them." Silence filled the truck. Neither child understood what it meant. Outside, the German shepherd suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood alert. Somewhere beyond the trees, a distant light appeared through the snowfall. It moved slowly along the highway. A vehicle. The dog turned toward it immediately. Then he began barking. Not loudly, not frantically, just enough to carry through the wind. Half a mile away, Ethan Walker tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his aging Ford pickup. The former Marine had spent the evening delivering supplies to an isolated church near Swan Valley. At 39 years old, Ethan had learned to trust instincts that did not always make sense. When he heard the barking through the storm, something inside him told him to stop. He lowered the window slightly. The freezing air rushed into the cab. There it was again. A dog. Ethan slowed the truck. The headlights swept across the road ahead until they found the abandoned vehicle buried beneath snow. His heart sank instantly. No one left a vehicle there in weather like this. He pulled onto the shoulder and stepped out. The cold hit him hard. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he approached. The German Shepherd trotted directly toward him, then looked back at the truck. Ethan understood immediately. "Show me," he said softly. Moments later, he reached the driver's side window and froze. Two frightened children stared back at him through the fogged glass. Relief flooded their faces the moment they saw another human being. Ethan moved quickly but calmly, opening the door and wrapping his heavy coat around both children. The warm scent of cedar and coffee clung to the fabric. Lily buried her face into it. Liam held the photograph tightly against his chest. The German Shepherd stood nearby, watching everything with those steady amber eyes. Ethan glanced toward him. "Looks like you found them before anyone else did." The dog wagged his tail once. Then he turned toward the dark forest beyond the road. For a brief moment, Ethan thought he saw something unusual. The dog was not looking at the trees. He was looking beyond them, as if he already knew th. The storm finally loosened its grip just before dawn. Pale light spilled across the snow-covered valley as Ethan drove toward his small ranch outside Sealy Lake. The windshield wipers moved slowly now, brushing away the last traces of winter's anger. Liam and Lily sat quietly beneath thick blankets in the back seat. Exhaustion had replaced fear. The German Shepherd rested beside them, his body stretched across the floorboard as though guarding them even in sleep. Ethan glanced at the rearview mirror. Every few seconds, the dog's eyes opened. Every few seconds, he checked on the children. By the time they reached the ranch, the eastern horizon had begun glowing with soft shades of gold and blue. Ethan's property sat on 20 acres of open land bordered by pine forest and frozen pasture. A weathered red barn stood near the main house. Smoke drifted lazily from the stone chimney. It was not a large place, but it was warm, and sometimes warmth was enough. Inside, the scent of coffee, cedar, and fresh bread welcomed them through the door. Ethan knelt beside the twins and offered a reassuring smile. "You are safe here," he said. The words were simple, yet neither child had heard them in a very long time. Lily's eyes filled with quiet emotion. Liam looked down at the photograph still clutched in his hands. The torn edge seemed to bother him more with every passing hour. The German Shepherd wandered slowly through the house. He inspected every room before settling near the fireplace. His amber eyes followed the children wherever they moved. Ethan noticed it immediately. The dog was not acting like a stray. He was acting like he already knew them. Over the next few days, life settled into a fragile routine. Snow continued falling outside, covering fences and fields beneath a blanket of white. Ethan contacted local authorities and social services, hoping to learn something about the twins. The answers were frustratingly thin. No missing persons reports matched their descriptions. No records explained who they were. It was as if someone had carefully erased every trail behind them. Meanwhile, the German Shepherd remained close. Liam eventually named him Ranger after hearing Ethan mention how dependable he had been since appearing that night. Ranger seemed to accept the name immediately, yet something strange began happening. Every afternoon, shortly before sunset, Ranger walked to the edge of the property and stared toward the forest. He would stand there for several minutes without moving, watching, waiting, listening. On the fifth evening, Liam followed him. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he approached. Ranger did not react. His attention remained fixed on a distant section of trees nearly 200 yards away. "What are you looking at?" Liam asked softly. Ranger's ears twitched. Then he began walking. Not toward the house, not toward the road, toward the forest. Liam hesitated before following. The setting sun painted the snow in shades of orange and pink. Shadows stretched between the pines like dark rivers. Ranger moved with purpose, never looking back, almost as if he already knew Liam would follow. After 10 minutes, they reached an enormous old cottonwood standing alone near a frozen creek bed. Ranger stopped. He lowered his nose to the snow and began pawing gently at the ground. Liam frowned. Beneath the fresh snow, something metallic caught the fading light. His heart skipped. Ranger dug once more. The object became clearer. It was not a rock. It was not a branch. It looked like the corner of a small metal box buried beneath years of earth and winter. And somehow, deep inside, Liam felt the strange certainty that whatever was hidden there had been waiting for him all along. The last rays of sunlight slipped behind the mountains as Liam dropped to his knees beside the old cottonwood tree. His pulse echoed in his ears. Ranger continued brushing snow aside with careful movements, exposing more of the object hidden beneath the frozen ground. It was a metal box no larger than a shoebox, worn by years of weather and rust. Liam swallowed hard and looked back toward the ranch. The lights of Ethan's house glowed faintly through the trees nearly 200 yards away. Part of him wanted to run back immediately. Another part could not look away. Ranger stepped aside and sat quietly beside the tree. The dog seemed strangely calm, almost as though his job was finished. Liam crouched lower and brushed snow from the lid. Faint scratches covered the surface. Most were impossible to read, but one mark remained visible. A single date, December 14th, 11 years earlier. Liam stared at it. Something about the number sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the cold air. He did not know why. He simply felt connected to it. Moments later, he was racing back toward the house with Ranger beside him. Ethan opened the front door before they even reached the porch. One look at Liam's face told him something unusual had happened. 20 minutes later, all four of them sat around the wooden kitchen table. A lantern cast warm golden light across the room, while snow drifted softly beyond the windows. The metal box rested in the center of the table. Lily leaned closer. Ethan studied the rusted latch carefully. "You sure this is where Ranger led you?" he asked. Liam nodded. He went straight to it. Ethan glanced at the German shepherd lying near the fireplace. Ranger watched quietly, but never took his eyes off the box. Ethan finally reached forward and lifted the latch. The metal groaned softly. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the lid opened. Inside were several items wrapped in old cloth. The first was a photograph. Ethan carefully unfolded it. Immediately, the room fell silent. The picture showed a young woman standing beside two infant twins bundled in blankets. Her smile was bright despite the faded image. Liam and Lily instantly recognized the babies. They had seen them before in the torn photograph left inside the truck. But this picture was complete. No one had been removed. The woman stood beside a tall man whose face was partly turned away from the camera. Only his profile was visible. Ethan studied it closely. Something about the man seemed familiar, though he could not explain why. Beneath the photograph rested several folded documents. Most were damaged by moisture and time. The writing had faded. Yet one page remained readable. Ethan unfolded it carefully. The paper crackled in the quiet kitchen. His eyes moved slowly across the words. Then his expression changed. Liam noticed immediately. "What is it?" Ethan hesitated. The room felt suddenly smaller. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the windows. Finally, he looked up. "This is a property record." Lily frowned. "What does that mean?" Ethan stared at the document again. "It means whoever owned this land left something behind." His voice lowered. "And according to this record, the property does not belong to the person everyone thinks it does." Silence settled over the room. Ranger slowly rose to his feet near the fireplace. His ears tilted forward. Then he walked toward the table and gently placed his nose against the photograph of the young woman. For several seconds he did not move, almost as though he remembered her. And for the first time since finding the twins, Ethan began to suspect that Ranger had never been a random stray at all. The discovery changed the atmosphere inside the ranch. Even after the children went to bed that night, Ethan remained seated at the kitchen table with the documents spread before him. The lantern cast long shadows across the wood grain while Ranger rested nearby, his head lowered but his eyes open. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines. Ethan studied every page again. Most of the writing had faded beyond recognition, but one name appeared repeatedly throughout the surviving records. Victor Langford. Ethan leaned back slowly. The name meant something. He had heard it before. Not in military service. Not in town. Somewhere else. Somewhere recent. He rubbed his jaw and stared into the darkness beyond the window. Then it came to him. Victor Langford was one of the largest landowners in western Montana. His company owned thousands of acres, several ranches, and a chain of luxury resorts scattered across the state. He was wealthy, respected, and often featured in local newspapers for charitable donations and community projects. Yet Ethan could not understand why his name would appear inside a box hidden beneath a tree, especially beside photographs connected to Liam and Lily. The following morning, the ranch awoke beneath clear skies for the first time in days. Sunlight sparkled across the snowfields like scattered diamonds. Liam and Lily helped feed the horses while Ethan drove into town to visit the county records office. Ranger watched him leave from the porch. For some reason, the dog seemed uneasy. 3 hours later, Ethan sat across from a clerk surrounded by decades of property maps and archived files. The search produced something unexpected. 11 years earlier, the parcel of land surrounding the old cottonwood tree had belonged to a woman named Claire Bennett. Ethan's pulse quickened when he saw the photograph again in his mind. The smiling woman holding the twins. Claire Bennett. The names matched. But what caught his attention even more was what happened afterward. According to the records, ownership of the property had been transferred just 6 months later. The new owner was Victor Langford. Ethan stared at the paperwork. The timing felt impossible to ignore. Claire disappeared. The land changed hands. The twins vanished from public records. And somehow a German shepherd had spent years guarding a secret buried beneath that very property. On the drive home, Ethan's thoughts churned like storm clouds. As he entered the valley, another surprise awaited him. A black luxury SUV sat parked beside the ranch gate. Ethan slowed immediately. Standing near the fence was a tall man wearing an expensive wool coat. Silver hair, polished boots, calm posture. The man appeared to be in his early 60s. Ranger stood 20 feet away, motionless. His ears were pinned back. His gaze never left the visitor. Ethan pulled to a stop and stepped out of the truck. The man offered a polite smile. "Mr. Walker, I presume." His voice was smooth and measured. "My name is Victor Langford." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Victor glanced toward the ranch house where Liam and Lily played in the snow. For a brief moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Then he looked back at Ethan. "I heard you recently took in 2 children during the storm," he said. "I would very much like to speak with them." At those words, Ranger released a low growl unlike anything Ethan had heard before. The growl stopped the conversation instantly. Victor Langford's smile remained in place, but something shifted behind his eyes. Ranger stood between the ranch house and the visitor now, his body rigid, his amber gaze locked on the older man. The winter air felt heavier somehow. Ethan stepped forward calmly and rested a hand on the German shepherd's shoulder. Ranger obeyed, but he did not look away. "That is unusual," Victor said softly. "Most dogs like me." Ethan studied him carefully. Ranger usually has a reason for what he does. For a moment, neither man spoke. Snow drifted lazily from the branches overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried across the valley. Victor eventually nodded and glanced toward the children again. Liam and Lily had stopped playing. They stood near the porch watching the exchange with quiet curiosity. Victor's expression softened, almost sadly. "I apologize if my visit seems sudden," he said. "I have spent years supporting youth programs throughout Montana. When I heard about 2 abandoned children surviving that storm, I wanted to help." The explanation sounded reasonable, yet Ethan felt no comfort from it. The timing was too perfect. The connection to the hidden documents was too strong. "That is generous," Ethan replied, "but I think they have had enough surprises for a while." Victor accepted the answer with a polite nod. Before leaving, however, he reached into his coat and handed Ethan a business card. "If you uncover anything about their past, please call me. Some stories deserve the truth." Then he returned to the SUV and drove away. The moment the vehicle disappeared down the road, Ranger relaxed. His growl faded, but Ethan noticed something strange. The dog immediately ran toward the fence line where Victor had been standing. He lowered his nose to the snow and began sniffing intensely. Back inside the house, Ethan placed the business card beside the documents from the metal box. As he compared names and dates, another detail caught his attention. One of the damaged pages contained a partial address. Most of the ink had vanished, but a few words remained visible. "Cedar Ridge Cabin, Pine Creek Road." Ethan frowned. Pine Creek Road lay nearly 30 miles north of the ranch, deep in an isolated section of forest rarely visited during winter. He turned the page over. Nothing else remained. Yet Ranger suddenly lifted his head from across the room. His ears stood alert. Slowly, the dog walked to the table. He sniffed the paper once. Then he placed his paw directly on the faded address. Ethan stared. "You know this place, do you not?" Ranger's tail moved once. The following morning dawned cold and clear. Ethan loaded supplies into the truck while Liam and Lily bundled themselves in winter coats. Neither child wanted to stay behind. Something about the mystery had become personal. Perhaps because every clue seemed connected to them. Perhaps because they were tired of living without answers. The drive north took nearly an hour. Snow-covered mountains surrounded them on every side. Pine forests stretched endlessly across the landscape. Finally, a narrow dirt road emerged from the trees. A weathered sign stood crooked beside it. Pine Creek Road. Ethan's pulse quickened. Ranger immediately sat upright in the back seat. His attention focused on the forest ahead. The old German shepherd was no longer following clues. He was leading them somewhere. And as the truck disappeared beneath the towering pines, none of them realized that the next discovery would reveal something even more shocking than the hidden box beneath the cottonwood tree. The forest seemed to swallow sound as the truck crawled deeper along Pine Creek Road. Towering pines rose on both sides like silent guardians, their branches heavy with fresh snow. The farther they traveled, the older the landscape appeared. Weathered fence posts leaned beneath drifts. Forgotten trails disappeared beneath white blankets. Even the sunlight struggled to reach the ground. Ethan followed the narrow road until Ranger suddenly stood in the back seat. A sharp whine escaped his throat. Then he looked toward the woods to the left. Ethan stopped the truck immediately. The engine fell silent. For a moment, nobody moved. Ranger jumped out the moment the door opened and trotted into the trees. Liam and Lily exchanged nervous glances before following Ethan through the snow. Their boots sank several inches with every step. The air smelled of pine sap and cold earth. Ranger moved confidently between the trunks, weaving through the forest as though he had walked this path many times before. Nearly 15 minutes later, the trees opened into a small clearing. There, hidden among the snow-covered evergreens, stood an old cabin. Time had weathered the structure. The porch sagged slightly. Frost covered the windows. Yet despite its age, the cabin did not appear abandoned. Ethan noticed something immediately. The front door had been repaired recently. Fresh lumber stood out against the faded walls. Ranger approached the porch and stopped. His tail moved slowly, not with excitement, with recognition. Ethan felt a strange chill travel through him. He climbed the steps and carefully pushed the door open. The hinges groaned softly. Dust floated through narrow beams of light. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar, paper, and memories. Inside, furniture remained exactly where someone had left it years ago. A rocking chair sat beside a stone fireplace. Books lined wooden shelves. Family photographs rested atop a mantel. Lily stepped forward first. Her breath caught. Every photograph showed the same woman from the picture found inside the metal box. Claire Bennett. Some images showed her smiling beside horses. Others showed her standing near this very cabin. Then Liam noticed something else. One photograph displayed Claire holding two newborn babies wrapped in matching blankets. His eyes widened. "That is us," he whispered. The room fell silent. Ethan carefully lifted the frame. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were 4 simple words. Liam and Lily. First day home. Neither child spoke. For the first time, they were looking at proof that someone had once loved them deeply. Ranger wandered into a back room. Moments later, they heard him scratching softly against the floor. Ethan followed the sound. Near an old writing desk, a loose floorboard had shifted. Beneath it lay a small leather journal wrapped in cloth. The cover bore Claire Bennett's name. Ethan opened it carefully. Most pages contained ordinary entries about ranch life, weather, and family memories. But near the end, the handwriting changed. The words became hurried, uneasy. One passage made Ethan stop breathing for a moment. "If anything happens to me, the children must know the truth. Victor promised he would protect us, but I no longer know who I can trust. Ranger is the only one who never leaves my side." Ethan slowly lowered the journal. Across the room, Ranger sat beside the desk, watching him quietly. The old dog had not simply led them to a cabin. He had led them to Claire's voice. And somewhere within the remaining pages of that journal, the answers they had been searching for were finally waiting. Snow began falling again as evening settled over the cabin. The world outside faded into shades of blue and silver while Ethan sat beside the fireplace, turning page after page of Claire Bennett's journal. Liam and Lily remained close, listening to every word. Ranger lay at Ethan's feet, his head resting on his paws, though his eyes never seemed to leave the worn leather book. The entries revealed a life filled with hope at first. Claire wrote about raising horses, watching sunsets over the mountains, and dreaming of a future for her children. But as the pages continued, the tone slowly changed. Worry appeared between the lines. Questions appeared where certainty once lived. Then Ethan reached an entry dated just weeks before the twins disappeared from public records. He read silently for several moments before looking up. His expression had gone pale. Lily noticed immediately. "What does it say?" Ethan took a slow breath and continued reading aloud. Claire wrote that Victor Langford was not a stranger to the family. He had once been her business partner and one of her closest friends. After her husband died unexpectedly from an illness, Victor had stepped in to help manage financial matters connected to the ranch. At first, she trusted him completely, but over time she discovered documents she did not understand. Ownership records changed without explanation. Accounts moved between companies. Meetings took place behind closed doors. Claire feared she was losing control of property that legally belonged to her children. Ethan turned another page. The next entry changed everything. Claire described creating a hidden trust fund years earlier. The account contained land rights, mineral royalties, and family assets worth millions of dollars. Everything had been placed in Liam and Lily's names. The inheritance would become accessible when they reached adulthood. Ethan lowered the journal slowly. The room fell silent. Suddenly, every piece of the mystery began fitting together. The abandoned records, the hidden box, the property transfer, even Victor's unexpected visit. Liam stared at the fire. "You mean somebody wanted us because of money?" Ethan looked at him carefully. "I think somebody wanted control of what was meant for you." A cold wind rattled the cabin windows. At that exact moment, Ranger lifted his head sharply. His ears stood alert. He walked toward the front door and released a short bark. Ethan frowned. Ranger rarely barked without reason. He opened the door and stepped outside. Snowflakes drifted through the darkness. For several seconds he saw nothing. Then a faint light appeared beyond the trees. Headlights. A vehicle sat motionless at the edge of the forest nearly 300 yards away. The engine was running. Ethan could see the glow through the falling snow. Whoever was inside was watching the cabin. The light remained there for nearly a minute. Then the vehicle slowly turned and disappeared into the night. Ethan stood frozen beneath the snowfall. Back inside, Ranger returned to the journal and placed one paw against the final unread pages. There were still several entries remaining. And somehow Ethan knew the most important truth had not yet been revealed. Morning arrived quietly over Pine Creek. Pale sunlight filtered through frost-covered windows as Ethan turned to the final pages of Claire Bennett's journal. The cabin felt still, almost reverent, as though it had been waiting years for someone to read those words. Liam and Lily sat close together beneath a wool blanket while Ranger rested beside the fireplace. The old German shepherd seemed calmer now, patient, as if he knew the end of the journey was finally within reach. Ethan carefully unfolded the last page. Claire's handwriting appeared steadier than before. There was no fear in those final lines, only determination. She wrote that if her children were reading those words someday, then truth had survived. She explained that Victor Langford had never been their enemy. The misunderstanding that had haunted the family began when trusted advisors concealed information from both of them. When Claire discovered irregularities involving the trust fund, she feared everyone around her. Even Victor, unsure whom to trust, she withdrew from public life and hid important records to protect her children until the truth could be sorted out. Then came the final revelation. Claire had become seriously ill shortly after writing those pages. Knowing her time might be limited, she entrusted copies of every legal document to Victor because he was the only person with the resources to protect the inheritance from those seeking to exploit it. She wrote that Ranger had been present through it all. The dog had watched every meeting, every difficult decision, every tear. Most importantly, she revealed that Victor had promised to find Liam and Lily when the time was right and return everything that belonged to them. Silence filled the room. Ethan lowered the journal slowly. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Liam looked toward the window. So he was trying to help? Ethan nodded. It looks that way. Later that afternoon, they returned to the ranch. Waiting beside the gate was the same black SUV. Victor stood outside, hands tucked into his coat pockets. Snow sparkled across the valley. This time Ranger approached him without hesitation. The old dog stopped at Victor's side and gently leaned against his leg. The gesture said more than words ever could. Victor's eyes filled with emotion. He knelt and stroked the shepherd's graying fur. You remembered, he whispered. Hours later, documents were reviewed, records confirmed, and questions finally answered. The trust fund remained intact exactly as Claire intended. More importantly, Liam and Lily finally learned who they were and where they came from. Yet as evening settled over the ranch, none of that seemed as important as the simple scene unfolding around the dinner table. Ethan sat between the twins while laughter drifted through the warm kitchen. Snow fell softly beyond the windows. Ranger lay beneath the table, his head resting across his paws, listening to the voices around him. For the first time since that stormy night on Highway 83, there was no mystery left to solve. No secret waiting beneath the snow. Only a family brought together by faith, loyalty, and a dog who never stopped guarding the truth. And as the fire crackled gently in the stone hearth, Ranger closed his eyes, finally at peace, knowing the promise he had protected for so many years had found its way home.